Hello, Bible readers. So, for the third straight post, I'm talking about the New Jerusalem. I mean, it is John's image of heaven, so it's probably worth our consideration. I already talked about how the New Jerusalem is a city, not some vast countryside or your own planet like Mormons imagine, for example. The New Jerusalem is not an escape. It is the fulfillment of human promise, where the beauty of life is not a solo, but a symphony, where God's justice fully reigns and our foibles and folly will not follow us. Not only is it a city, it is Jerusalem, in particular, where God encountered the world in its history as much as anywhere. And so the point being, God will not throw away human history, making all new things. God will instead make all things new, which means our efforts to make the world a better place, our loves, our experiences of life in abundance, those will prove to be foundations for this new Jerusalem. And it's a big place. I ended the last post starting in on how it would have been easy for John and the fledgling church of the first century to say, oh yeah, there's going to be heaven and we'll be the only ones invited. Pooh on you and you and you and you and you. God hates all of you others who've hated us for so long. Meh. But that's not what John says. In fact, we're going to see John modify his own tradition in order to portray a radically inclusive, big, grace-filled city. Revelation 21, verse 3 says, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people. Zzz. And God himself will be with them." This is the second time a plural S is very important. Back in the sixth vision of the end that I called the Last Judgment. Not just I have called that. Many people have called it the Last Judgment. You may remember those who are judged are not only judged by a book, but by books. The book of their own deeds, which is inevitably full of not so great things, and the Lamekins book of life, the grace book, that I imagine is written in all caps, speaking much more loudly than the fine print in the book of my life. Anyway, to get at what John means with this plural S in the seventh vision of the end, we need to recognize that John is quoting Ezekiel 37, verse 27, which says, "My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." People. Singular. No S. Israel. The people of Israel shall be my people, says God. But here in Revelation, quoting Ezekiel, John goes out of his way to alter this one word. And trust me, people hearing it would have noticed. Peoples. He is explicitly saying that the New Jerusalem will not just be populated by the chosen people only, the peoples of the earth, the nations, and even their kings. Do you see that in verse 24 here? I mean, are you kidding me, John? The kings that had opposed God's rule and who oppressed the church, they are here pictured as redeemed citizens of a holy city. Radically inclusive indeed. Now, you might be thinking, Jason, that's a lot to hang on one little S. But John gets radical again with this tree whose leaves are for healing. Again, he's pulling this concept from Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel 47:12, the leaves on that tree are for healing, like healing a person, an individual. But John again modifies this well-known hope and enlarges the scope of what God has in mind in terms of healing. John says that the tree in Revelation, the tree's leaves will be for the healing of the nations. Which ones? He doesn't say, which seems to me to mean all of them. Radically inclusive. Here's another one. Ezekiel's city had 12 gates that served as exits for going out into the land. The New Jerusalem has just one wall, 12 gates, and they're always open. Traffic goes just one way from outside to inside. And here's something you can only learn by reading a commentary like the one I'm reading from Professor Eugene Boring. He says, in previous apocalyptic tradition, the 12 gates, and they always said there were 12 gates. This is nothing new. But they had astrological significance. So like one of these apocryphal stories, First Enoch, would relate the gates to jewels that were arranged on the breastplate of the high priest as detailed in the Old Testament. And if you've read the parts of the Old Testament that detail the breastplate, you know it can get really detailed. Well, John knows all about the significance given to the gates and to the jewels, a jewel assigned to each gate. And so John lists the gates, kind of as expected, only in the exact reverse order of what people would have usually heard. So, like, we might be used to people saying north, south, east, west. For whatever reason, that's just how we say it. We don't put a lot of significance on why we say north first and south second and east third and west fourth. But what if we did? And we put significance into the order? Well, it would just sound odd for me to say west, east, south, north, wouldn't it? That's backwards. Well, what if that not only just sounded odd, but meant something opposite or backward? Well, that's what John is up to as he lists the gates backwards. It sounds weird, and it now means something else. His point is, all that stuff, that astrological and all that stuff no longer matters. This new Jerusalem is not tribal. It is not sectarian. Astrological calculations do not matter. Isaiah dreamed of a day in his own 19th chapter when Israel would worship with Egypt and with Assyria, Israel's enemies. Well, John doesn't say God will make some things new. He says all things, even who gets to come into this holy city. And that's the next thing I want to share about the New Jerusalem, that it is holy. Now, it's important to know what the Bible means by this word holy. Oftentimes our culture uses this word as though it means morally superior, holier than thou. But when the Bible says God is holy, or that the church is called to be holy, it's not about being morally correct. It's about otherness. Whenever I see the word holy, in my mind I substitute the word other. God is holy and completely other. And by that I mean unusual, atypical, extraordinary, that kind of other. Not to be left out or othered, but to be regarded as set aside, beyond. Holy is other. And so the holiness God demands of God's people is way more than simple compliance with a set of rules or pious behavior to be holier than thou. God calls God's people to a life that is other, that is beyond, that is extraordinary, distinct from a typical life. Think of when Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. That is Paul encouraging people to be holy. Well, one of the things about being holy, about being other, is that by definition, holy can only function against unholy, right? You can only set someone or something aside from an original someone or something, right? So holiness by its nature, by the nature of the concept, always describes a separation, a divide. Well, this becomes another concept that John just turns upside down and inside out. Watch what he does here. So first of all, John's picture of a new Jerusalem affirms God's kind of holiness, just being, right? Justice for all, worshiping God, all the things. And it is all holy that is set aside from unholy, as John shares a list of those who are outside the city, those who are unholy, the cowardly, the faithless, murderers, all those people. So the inside-outside aspect of holiness still exists, even in the New Jerusalem. But that's not all John has to say about this, because the wall that separates insiders from outsiders has these 12 gates whose doors are always open with one-way traffic, and the traffic only goes in, which means any outsider is welcome to become an insider. Boring says, just as John takes the word win or victory from one language game and transforms it so that everybody wins, with no losers implied, he does the same thing with this idea, this concept of holiness. He expands holiness to include all of reality so that none remain unholy. The point John is making is that all become holy in the New Jerusalem. All become other without othering anyone ever again. Others, in the bad sense, will pass away in the New Jerusalem. All will become one in a holy city. The last thing about this city, this renewed Jerusalem, this big, inclusive, holy city, is that it is an active city. John's vision does not describe a place of eternal rest, but a place of ceaseless activity. John does not get into mythical details that can satisfy our curiosity about what we'll do and what it'll be like or anything like that. How old will our bodies be? John is not interested in answering stuff like that. Instead, John offers two pictures. Number one, his servants, God's servants, shall worship him or serve him, as it says in chapter 22, verse 3. And number two, they shall reign forever and ever. Boring says the height and depth of the meaning of life in this world, grateful worship to the Creator, is raised to the power of infinity. It makes lived happily ever after look pale in comparison. Of course, this picture John creates for his churches is not trying to answer speculative questions about heaven or the afterlife. He's trying to help the people of these churches make decisions about where to orient their lives, toward Rome or toward a new Jerusalem. Okay, in my next post, I'm going to look at how the vision ends, how the letter ends. And then I'm going to come to a final post as I wander through one more tough topic Revelation brings to the surface. Is salvation universal, or is salvation limited? In other words, does everybody get grace, or do just some of us? And if just some of us, who? And why do we think what we think? And how do we get there? I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.